So welcome to the Right to Publish webinar. We're going to be talking today about organization and flow in writing. And to do that, we'll delve back in just a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about reverse outlining. We'll talk about the Killingsworth and Gilbert example. We'll talk about nature of structure and some story kind of manuscript types. We'll talk about some methods, and these are housed within the Canvas site as well. And I'm just, in my mind, I'm trying to think if I opened that module up. But if I didn't open the module up for today's session, I will do so afterwards. And we'll talk about arrangement. Oftentimes when we get stuck on the structure of how it is that we organize our ideas, it's because we're thinking about them in a particular kind of context, and oftentimes pretty abstractly. And so if you can think about how it is that we describe things or arrange things on a page for others to understand, it can make your life a lot easier in writing it out, and it can also make the reader's experience a lot easier as well. All right. So if you're doing the Canvas course, just know that there's a method to tighten paragraphs that we'll touch on today, and a method to create flow, and just kind of practice with that. It's in the Canvas site, the handout, and I'll show a picture and image of it in just a moment. And we'll talk a bit about what it is that you do with pulling out those key sentences, just like we do with a reverse outline, right? In order to be able to tighten and kind of organize and create flow. So some of this, we've already done some of these methods before, but just remember you can use these methods not just to understand what's in other people's articles or to understand how you've structured out your own article, but also then to create flow, right? To think about what it is that your readers need to hear, and continue building and some fine tuning, right, for your article. And so these are what the handouts look like. And these come from workshops that we used to do in person, actually. And we would have people go through and work on some of their pieces. And when we turned to webinars, we shortened the time that we're here and we went virtual. So it makes it a little bit more difficult. But just know that you can access these, or if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. All right, so when we talk about organizing, what are we really talking about? Because it seems like we should just be able to organize our ideas, right? And then craft them out on the page and then have that be it. Isn't that the fantasy of writing? And ultimately, there's an element of that, right? It's the writerly process of placing things in order, paragraphs and sections, so that readers know what to understand, and they know how to make sense of a given topic. Because the topics that we write on in academia can be often quite complex. New knowledge, right, is always kind of pushing the boundaries and saying something new, which can be in itself complex. But it's also being built on specialized knowledge and discourses. And so having a regular kind of structure for your article or for your report or for your proposal, for your sentences, all of that can help your reader make sense of what it is that you're talking about, meaning that they're not having to fight against the structure to be able to understand. If you've ever read a piece of writing where it feels like you have to read the sentence 2 or 3 times, or you read a paragraph and you're like, wait, what did that say? And you go back and you pay really close attention and you read through that paragraph very carefully, and you're still, by the end of it, a little flummoxed on what it is that it's saying. It may be that there's a glimmer of an idea, but it's actually not organized well for you as a reader. And so when we think about and talk about organizing here, we want to talk about how is it that we organize with that kind of reader in mind. And basically what you're doing is you're taking something that can be like a jumbled mess of your thoughts, right? All this content and information that you know, and then you're putting it within some sort of structured and context so that you can, in this case, it's, images of photographs, and we're putting them into a photograph album. Then you can flip through them. You can see what they are. You can understand them a little bit better. The context changes then, so that readers can then make sense of it. And note that when you do that, the way that you've put together that photo album or that structure for them to make sense of, right? That's going to be your reader's experience, but it's also going to be unique to you. It's going to be unique to your project. So flow And what is it that we mean by flow? You hear a lot about it. I know a number of English teachers who are just like, I despise the term flow. It's so loosey goosey, right? It doesn't really mean anything. So when we talk about it, in general, what we're talking about is the reader's experience of that arrangement of sentences, paragraphs, and sections in a manuscript. So it's what it is that kind of genre, those structures help the reader kind of get into the groove and move through it. And of course, every article will be unique and different. Every proposal, right, is going to be unique and different. And so it's how you've arranged according to existing structures, reader expectations, and also kind of your own kind of interest and personality that's showing through in the word choices that you make that will create the experience of reading and for flow. And so flow can be something that is just a really kind of slow and kind of gradual kind of study of something, right? It's not too wild, not too rambunctious. But flow can also be pretty fast moving. So you can have a kind of slow moving piece where you really dig in deeply to ideas or you kind of ponder ideas in academic writing, or you can have things that move super fast. And depending on what it is that you're writing and for what purposes will determine kind of how quickly you're creating that flow for the reader to move them through. So we're going to take a look at something that moves pretty quickly. We're going to take a look at the Brevia piece by Killingsworth and Gilbert on a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. And again, the highlighted portions, those underlined in pink, are the topic sentence for each of their paragraphs. We've used this piece before when we looked at abstracting and how you can take topic sentences from kind of key sections, right, portions of your key points for all of those areas and kind of pull those together into what creates an abstract or kind of a summary abstract of your piece. Here we're going to be talking about it in terms of organization and flow. So we're going to read through this pretty quickly, only the topic sentences once again. And what I want you to do is kind of get a sense of what's there because we're going to start working through it then on its structure and talking about how it's arranged. So unlike other animals, human beings spend a lot of time thinking about what is not going on around them, contemplating events that happened in the past, might happen in the future, or will never happen at all. Indeed, stimulus independent thought, which is that, right, things that don't happen, or, right, aren't going on around them right immediately, or mind wandering, appears to be a brain's default mode of operations. All right, so this is our intro paragraph and kind of our introduction to the main topic, right, and trying to understand, right, the emotional kind of quality of that experience. All right, so lab experiments have revealed a great deal about cognitive and neural bases of mind wandering, but little about its emotional consequences in everyday life. So this is that gap that they're going to fill with their research. This is what they did to do it. They developed a research protocol where they developed an app for iPhones, and they used it to create an unusually large database of real-time reports of thoughts, feelings, and actions of a broad range of people as they went about their daily activities. And this is their method section. And yes, it is all one sentence. I'm going to read only what's not in parentheses, right? So parenthetical information I'm going to leave as parenthetical. So to find out how often people's minds wander, what topics they wandered to, and how those wanderings affect their happiness, we analyzed samples from 2,250 adults who were randomly assigned to answer a happiness question, answered on a continuous sliding scale from very bad to very good, an activity question, answered by endorsing one or more of 22 activities adapted from the day reconstruction method, and a mind wandering question, answered with one of four options: no, yes, something pleasant, yes, something neutral, or yes, something unpleasant. All right. And I love the last sentence in the paragraph. Our analyses revealed these three facts, right? And the three facts are, by the way, the next paragraphs of their findings. And see, these are their top three findings. And we will go back to these and talk about how they're arranged, like why this first finding, why the next one is second, and why the next one is third. And so see if you can kind of figure out some of the arrangement here. So first, and we know it's first because they tell us it's first. First, people's minds wandered frequently, regardless of what they were doing. second multi-level regression revealed that people were less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were not. And this was true during all activities, including the least enjoyable. Third, what people were thinking was a better predictor of their happiness than what they were doing. All right, so those are their three findings. And in conclusion, a human mind is a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. They take us right back to even their title. So it's a really tidy, it's a super tight and well put together kind of short piece. All right. So we're going to take and insert some structure and ideas about structure in between now, and then we'll do the quick analysis with it. That the structure, the placement of the parts within the system or your manuscript, right, presupposes some sort of organization. So interestingly enough, that the Killingsworth and Gilbert piece, right, the article, it presupposes an arrangement of ideas that will relate or connect with other parts as well as to the whole. That's how we get the sections, different sections. And then we also get the whole piece, right, put together. Within an academic text, that structure refers to the organization of the whole text as well as the relationship among the sections, paragraphs, and sentences. All right. So storytelling structures, they're not all the same. There's not only one story to tell. There's not only one way to tell it. And if you get really into the nitty gritty and you get into narrative theory, there are folks who say the novel gets retold every time it's told, right? Rewritten every time it's written, or the story gets told and retold every time it's retold. So that it's always new, it's always fresh, it's always something different. Maybe. But really, there are these basic structures that are familiar to us. Like it's how we know that certain structures make up detective stories. Certain structures make up the general storyline of fantasy stories, of I don't know, other kinds of mysteries or romance fiction or action adventure. There are certain types of not just genres of writing, but genres of storytelling that we come to expect certain things. And if they don't do those things well, then we actually don't consider them very good stories. And I don't, if you've ever left a movie going, I liked everything except for the ending, you are not alone. That happens a lot. Actually, Malcolm Gladwell was interviewed. If you are familiar with him, he's an avid reader and writer, but he talks about how the number of books that he now has left unread, and it's probably, he says it's pushing like 90%, right? It's a very special book that he will actually read the end because he doesn't trust some writers to be able to give him as good an ending as he would be able to imagine, which says something about endings, and it also says something about Malcolm Gladwell. So, all right. And yes, this is recorded, so I might take that part. But the storytelling structure that we're going to take a look at is the OCAR storytelling structure, which is the one that's most common to specialty journals that we're talking about in this writing to publish. However, you could be working on a proposal, by the way, and that is a different structure, or you could just be working on a kind of generalist publication. We're not, but we're just generally talking about OCAR structures in this. And the specialty journal piece, the structure for the Killingsworth and Gilbert piece was that kind of structure. Okay, so of those structures, OCAR is the opening, a challenge, an action, and a resolution. These are the things in the story that happens through that introduction, right? Your methods, your results, your findings, right? And your discussion. That layout gives us all of those elements. It gives us some sort of opening and understanding to who are the characters and what's going on in the story, right? What's that background? The challenge, like what is it that needs to be fixed, or the problem that's being solved, or what's being kind of studied, right, in that challenge. The action, those methods, like how did you do it? How did you study this, right? And what did you find? And those findings and the resolution of like, and these are the answers. This is what we know, and this is how we're moving forward. So it's a really familiar way of telling that story. Proposals work a little differently for those of you who are writing proposals, and that's because you really want to start with the action of like, what's going on and why is this an issue? And that's because then you get to the background and you can talk about how it is that you are the best person to be fulfilling the role of doing this new research in this new area. So they're structured just a little bit differently. So again, thinking about the OCAR structure, and then I'm going to take you through and talk about the Killingsworth and Gilbert piece. So that opening of who are your characters, who's the story about, where does it take place, right? What do they need to understand about the situation, the context, about the story that's going to follow, and what larger problem will that story address? So that's the kind of elements of those opening, that introduction, right? And in the Killingsworth and Gilbert piece, it's pretty simple. It's really about mind wandering. They define it, they give a context for it, and they talk about do we understand its emotional consequences? They bring in, other wisdom traditions and common ways of us thinking about mind wandering actually having a negative impact on us, but that we don't really have any data, right? And so the challenge is little is known, right, about those consequences of mind wandering, and that they need to collect those data. So if you think about it in terms of characters, it's still about mind wandering. It's still about kind of emotionally what people are, how they're feeling about what it is that they're currently doing and how they're thinking, right? And they develop an app to do that. The action, that is the web app itself. That's that method section where they do a random assigned check on happiness and activity, and then mind wandering. And they have, kind of these ways of like, mind wandering is frequent, less happy when mind wandering, and then they're thinking what people are thinking is a better predictor of happiness than what it is that they're doing, right? So that action, so as they go through and they gather this data and they tell us the story of what it is that they found, this is that action. And the resolution in those key findings can be summed up, and that everything comes together in the end, right? A human mind is a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. All right. Notice that how easy that is to follow, that those stories when they're structured that way. And the writing process doesn't feel like that at all. So when you're structuring things, it can often feel pretty chaotic, or that you're pulling things from different places because you are, right? You're pulling knowledge from your own kind of data and what it is that you see through that analysis, and kind of pulling it all together. But sometimes you don't see your data clearly until you have 3 or 4 figures, right, drafted about that. And you may even see it less or more clearly when you connect it with what other people have said prior to that. So you're reading and connecting ideas that way. You're also bringing conversations with your colleagues, with your advisors. All kinds of different things are playing on that. You go back to your old journals or your notes or other things. So that kind of, it's a recursive process as you move through and kind of pull what it is that you need for that story structure. We like to think of it as pretty linear, right? We gather our data, our evidence, we do an interpretation, we create some sort of new knowledge through that interpretation, and that goes out into the world, and readers read it, and there's a new understanding. And all of that linear kind of description makes it easy for us to talk about, and yet through those gaps of where it doesn't actually operate that way, we find large issues or challenges, not just for our own understanding and of our own work, but for us, our readers' understanding of our own work. So just know that if you're feeling like things are a little bit like hodgepodging, you're kind of pulling stuff together, that's all right. You're doing it right. Those orders of arrangement for structure. There are some main ways that we put things in order, first, second, third, right? In order to be able to convey information clearly to our readers. Chronological in that order of time, past to present to future. You can do something like movies do oftentimes, where they do retrospectives, or you kind of go back in time, briefly, when that happens in fiction or in movies. We can follow a character pretty easily. We know when they were here in the present. We know when they're imagining or fantasizing about something in the future. And we can also tell when they've kind of gone back in time, usually. And some movies make a lot of kind of their plot line about that. So if you've ever seen the movie Memento, right, that's about someone who trying to the movie's going back in time, and we're working against that with somebody who has an inability to create long-term memory. So it's just this kind of amazing movie where it plays with the order of time in order for us to be able to understand something new. But usually we don't want to confuse our readers, and we don't want to make them work too hard in academic writing. So we make it pretty clear. This is what we did first, this is what we did second, and this is what we did third. You can think about the method section in the Killingsworth and Gilbert piece and how they lay that out for us. on what it is they develop a web app. This is what the web app does, and I'd ask these questions in these ways. And it kind of takes us through, and there's a chronological order to their methodology. There's not, however, a chronological order to their arrangement of their findings. Their findings are different. They're not spatial, which is another common arrangement, and we'll talk about that in a moment too, but thematic. So that thematic or topical arrangement comes naturally out of the conversation that's being had, which makes it sometimes difficult to identify what comes first or what comes second. So if you find yourself trying to position things like, should I talk about this first or should I talk about that second? Or, how does this work? And that just know that you're working through that like thematic or topical arrangement. And there will be an inherent and kind of internal logic to it that you just kind of need to eyeball in order to be able to determine which comes first. And sometimes maybe it just doesn't matter. You can do one or the other. But so chronological, if you're arranging things that way, oftentimes, again, method sections are arranged in this process or this way. And you have, the transitions that you might use. So you can look at method sections and identify what are some of the most common transitions used, next or then or after. Spatial arrangements, for those of you who do work in biology or ecology, you may not think too much about things spatially if they're small, what you're studying, if you're studying like soil samples or how a cell is moving. But really, those are physical patterns and relationships between things that you will likely describe at some point spatially. So it doesn't have to be landscapes. It doesn't have to be east or west, but it does have to be in order that you're talking about so your reader does not get confused on what parts or what places you're talking about and how they're arranged. But the thematic or topical, that one, again, it's here you can see the arrangement. This is kind of a rainbow-ish arrangement, right? But we don't go Roy G. Biv. This one's different, right? We go from the yellows and internal, into the blues and then into the reds. So you can think about how it is that you're going to arrange things that's going to be pleasing and clear and a good experience for your readers. And topical arrangements are used in classification and division when you're defining things, comparisons or contrasts, right, one to the other, analogies when you're describing something in a particular way, definitions, examples, illustrations. Most of us are doing these types of descriptions within our academic work. It's the basis of being able to lay something out clearly and then to be able to identify its import and how it's significant. So we go back to the Killingsworth and Gilbert piece. You can see that, their first, their second, and their third. It's not arranged chronologically or spatially. It's arranged thematically. And what they're doing is they're giving us examples and illustrations of what it is that the impact, those emotional impacts are of mind wandering on folks. And if you find yourself using too many transitions, we use a lot of like in addition or moreover or furthermore, or however, those things, then just know that that's a first draft. And then you can figure out what are the connections, what are the ideas that are connecting rather than just the quick words that are linkages. Right? All right, so let's talk about, we're going to go back to, by the way, the first paragraph of Killingsworth and Gilbert, but I want to first talk about the paragraph as a unit so that we can get to that paragraph. But a good structure relies on complete, strong, and stable building blocks. In academic writing, it helps to think of paragraphs as your manuscript's building blocks, right? And that rather than just the sentences or just the words, sometimes if you get too small, it's too small, right? So paragraphs function as those chunks of raw material that you need in order to be able to engineer your structure. So for those of you who are engineers or kind of spatially oriented, that metaphor is for you. And there is a formula for a solid paragraph. It's basically one transition or a connection, and notice it's in parentheses. So if you have a first paragraph, you have one key idea for that one, and then the development of that key idea. And it's as simple as that. That's it. You need to wait, and the transition is to be able to build a bridge from the paragraph before or to build a bridge to the paragraph after. So that transition could be at the beginning or at the end. You wouldn't put a transition in the middle of a paragraph unless you're going to stop that paragraph and start another, right? So it seems pretty easy, but once again, when you're thinking through, like, okay, this is my key idea, and then you're developing that idea, and then you're like, did I give everybody enough information? Will they understand this? Can they picture this? Do they have enough to understand in the methods, or should I explain just a little bit more? And usually that's where you need to have, if you're not clear on that, um, then you need to have somebody else's eyes on your writing, get some feedback from a reader. It could be early stages, and you can just get feedback from a colleague. If it's in later stages, you probably want to be, touching base with your advisor and getting some expert feedback. Just making sure that it's readable and that you've developed um, the ideas enough. Okay, so we're going to go back to this first paragraph, and we're going to take a look at how that's structured. And we can see it within one paragraph, that building block and how it's put together. So unlike other animals, human beings spend a lot of time thinking about what's not going on, right? So here we got that context. It's interesting. It's about contemplating the past, the contingent future, some sort of imaginary future. We get a definition, so we get some clarity just in case people might go off on kind of like, whoa, this is kind of atmospheric. There's a lot that could be happening or not ever happening at all. We get grounded then with a definition on the ability of mind wandering to be studied and how it appears, right? Which means that we need to know more whether this really is the brain's default mode of operation. And then more about this default mode, right? That its ability is remarkable evolutionary achievement, allows people to learn, reason, and plan. It may also have an emotional cost, though, right? And that's the may, right? May appear when you're writing in your introduction. It could be that you're writing in these what could be hedging terms in other places. Like if you're writing about may or appear in your findings, that might not be what you want to do, right? You want to be more clear in your finding, but in your introduction, these are the places where there are questions about in your field, right? That you can start to answer through the rest of your piece. There's additional context here, right? Of the traditions that talk about mind wandering, right? And they speak to the downside. And so we go from definitions of mind wandering to there being an emotional cost, perhaps, of that default mode. We don't know if that's for sure, but we do know that most of it seems to be talked about or written about as negative according to philosophical and religious traditions, right? And then here's that one clear summation in one sentence of that paragraph, right? So these traditions suggest that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind, and are they right? These two sentences work together really beautifully to kind of pull together that introduction. Again, this is a brevia piece, so we have the entire introduction in one paragraph. And it takes us back to the topic. So it's got the key sentence for the whole piece, right? Has this topic in it. Is it a happy mind? It's a wandering mind, right? So it's an unhappy mind. And then are they right? And so then the rest of all of those paragraphs are showing us what they did in order to be able to determine one way or another if these philosophical and religious traditions are right, and thinking that when our minds wander, we're less happy. All right. And that question, right, which will be immediately answered, all of those subsequent paragraphs, right? And I just love that. Are they right? And it's just also a reminder, by the way, and remembering why I put this in purple, because if you pose a question, you have to answer it right away. Notice that this one is not answering the question right away in the following sentence. Like there's not a sentence backing up to this. It's actually the answer to it is through all of the rest of the paragraphs, or the 7 additional paragraphs, I think. All right. So as you're working through this, you're going to have lots of different components that you're pulling together, right? That experience of the writing process versus what the flow is going to be for the reader. And when you're writing for your reader in mind, you can have a lot of complexities. So the one that says this, that kind of description, that's a place where you can have complexity and movement and turns, but there's an order to it, and your reader is going to be able to follow you. Again, Masaru Hori's painting on the pipe, right? The pipes, where they often don't go anywhere, and they have all these pressure gauges that don't seem to measure what could they be measuring. I just love this, but I think sometimes our writing, it feels like this, but you don't want your reader to feel it like that as well. So if you're looking at methods to tighten your paragraphs. If you got them, they feel kind of loose, you're not quite sure if people are like able to follow along. Again, using that reverse outline process is fabulous because you can identify each key sentence in the paragraphs. And then if you put them in a separate document, then you can look at all of them and see what's the flow. Thinking about, does this need to be chronological here? Does it need to be spatial? Does it need to be thematic? Note that you can have all different types of arrangements in your document. You can make a sequential kind of chronological arrangement of events through your methods section for sure. But maybe by the time you get to your, findings and your discussion, you want to go much more thematic. That allows for you then to connect what other people have said before you. It's before and it's in time, but you're not going to be covering it in a chronological order. First, this person said this, then this person said that, then this person said this. That would be a little boring, right? So chronological is not your order. There's a thematic order that'll come naturally out of the conversations that are the most important and through the ideas that you want to give the greatest kind of priority to, the greatest amount of words to and information to. That's largely where it is that you'll start to make those decisions on what comes first, what comes second, and what comes third. And then to create flow, you can use those key sentences from that method and you can look at them and then just check out that order. Are they arranged in an orderly manner? Can you identify gaps or things that logic that's missing? Additional information where readers might have to kind of leap across a chasm in order to be able to get to someplace else? Are there ideas that are misplaced and they'd do better in some other arrangement? And then identify the repetitions and redundancies, like take out that what's redundant. So you can just add and subtract as you move through, arrange as you will, and it's great to be able to have digital documents, right? It's not like you're having to do this on an old-time computer or a typewriter, excuse me, and typing things out or handwriting it out. Maybe handwrite a bit, but yeah. So you get to be able to move things pretty quickly and easily through this process. When you're keeping in mind kind of how these operate, and I know this is a little fuzzy. I pulled it from Schimmel's Writing Science, and he talks about how those sentences, right, create the paragraphs that create the sections that create the overall on paper. But it's his reminder is that the story is a set of those arcs. So you want to make sure that any of your paragraphs, those key ideas that you're bringing forward, that those are related to the overall idea. So if we had, another, fourth idea in Killingsworth and Gilbert's piece, and it wanted to talk again about their methodology or something, new methods for new generations, it'd be out of place, right? It's not taking us back to the mind. It would be perhaps part of the conversation that happened with the development of the app. But because that part is out of place in the discussion, it doesn't really belong in that paper. Maybe that's a separate paper to talk about the technology and the methodology specifically. So maybe that's something that's a separate point. And again, just a reminder that how it is that you're structuring things, and it's going to feel on your end a little messy, but how it is that readers are going to imagine it happening is going to be that, oh, this is so easy to read. It must have been so easy to write is usually what happens, right? And so your takeaway is just a reminder and thinking about organization. That's your writerly experience. Flow, that's the reader's experience. And that along the way, there are going to be just what challenges, but you've got some strategies to meet that, right? How do you arrange things in what orders? How do you pull apart your manuscript and kind of reorganize it? And so those are the things that we use as kind of our ways to create order in our pieces. And just a reminder, you can practice that on the method to tighten paragraphs or create flow in the Canvas course, submitting your key sentences file. That's all you have to submit, by the way. You don't have to submit everything unless you want to, but just kind of looking at what it is that you've done with your key sentences. And if you've been working with key sentences before and you're reverse outlining, you can return to that document as well. All right, and reach out, of course, it's mid-semester. If you have any questions, please just touch base.